This is the YouTube video that keeps interpreters up.
Okay, we're already having laughter. Those of you who know Troublesome Terps will know who my guest is in this interview. Is the wonderful Alexander Gansmeier. Welcome to Inside Interpreting, Alex. This isn't a YouTube channel about things that keep interpreters up at night. This is a very different YouTube channel now. I wanted to invite Alex on the show because last time, if you watched it, we had the fantastic interview with Patrick Kendrick, and we talked a lot about sport and about football interpreting, but Alex is special for many reasons. But one of the reasons why Alex is special is that Alex builds his own interpreting teams. So if you can imagine what it's like to herd cats, building interpreting teams is kind of like that, only 10 times more expensive. So Alex, do you want to open up, rather than giving us a bit of your background, because people who listen to Troublesome Terps will know all about it and people who don't should do, could you give us an idea of what it looks like to build an interpreting team and what's been your favourite consulting story so far?
So what it looks like to build an interpreting team, that is actually a very good question. It really depends on the size of the team, I would say. So the standard sort of inquiry is, oh, we need, so I'm in Germany, so usually the base language will be German, and then they will say, oh, we need English and French and maybe Spanish, mostly English and French. And then you have your sort of Rolodex of contacts, but you basically have your favorite contacts already in mind. You know exactly who you want also for that particular job. If you have, multiple interpreters who could cover that language, you're like, okay, this is, I don't know, automotive. Oh, him or her will be perfect for this job. So you immediately contact them. So that's usually quite easy when it's smaller teams, just like one or two booths. What is more of a challenge is if it's larger teams. I think the largest I've done was 12 languages for one event. That can be tricky. Or events that go over a long period of time. So we've done press events that go over 2.5 weeks, where you have interpreters flying in, then you need to make sure the transfer is right, and then you have them flying out, and the next wave comes and they're overlapping. So that's when it gets a bit tricky. And that's when you need to make sure you have, well, you always need to make sure you have the right people, but especially for things that last a long time that require a lot of flexibility on everyone's part, you need to make sure that the interpersonal skills of the team to be recruited are what you're aiming for, not just the professional skills. Because if you are shuttling people back and forth and it's a very stressful environment, the last thing you want is 15 interpreters biting at your heel and chomping at the bit and saying, oh, but my coffee was only lukewarm, or I wanted fizzy water, or, something like that. So you need to make sure that you have the right people there on multiple levels.
And that's the incredible thing about consulting is you meet people who you would never previously have met. I rely a lot on contacts and referrals. So I remember one case where my usual favorite interpreter wasn't available for a project that I had, and I thought, who do I know? And I went, I don't know someone with that combination, but I know someone who knows someone. Right. It's kind of like, you know who to ask to get the right people. Now, let's do a bit of the background. You're a conference interpreter based in Munich in Germany, so you would normally interpret at conferences and business events. How did you move from being, if you like, just an interpreter, I hate the word just, but being just an interpreter to starting to build your own teams? Was that something that came naturally or something that you decided to do?
I think it's a little bit of both. Well, let's say I kind of fell into it because the client kind of required it, and they were like, hey, so we actually need this and that. We actually don't only need English, we actually need also French and Spanish. And because I had some connections, I was like, sure, no problem. And then I hung up the phone and I was like, oh crap, how do I actually do this? I have no idea how to do this. But, then I simply picked up the phone, called my colleagues, and they were like, yeah, it's fine. We'll figure it out. I'm available. So you can, note me down as a check. And then I just kind of took it bit by bit. And as you grow, as you go on, you kind of develop more sophisticated Excel spreadsheets, and you have your little workflow ahead. So it kind of builds up over time. Initially, the recruitments that I did were all here in Munich. So it's all people that I know personally. So I felt quite confident in the team. And also all of them are more experienced, or were more experienced interpreters at that point. And I knew that If I had any questions, I could always ask one of them. Or if I made like a horrible mistake and they would notice, that they would also let me know. It's like, hey, by the way, maybe you should consider this or that. So it was a little bit daunting, but then it was good because I had my network, you know what I mean? Like I had that safety net of the people that I recruited. And those are just kind of like the first few steps where you kind of not experiment is very much the wrong word here, but where you can kind of see how it goes. You can kind of see what works for you, what communication style works for you. And that's kind of how I started.
And I've had conversations with clients, and I've written posts myself on the difference between an interpreting agency and a consultant interpreter. How would you define the difference between those two? You can be as controversial as you like.
So I think an interpreting agency, I think you just put it very nicely. I'm not sure if we were recording already, but an interpreting agency, if you inquire with them, they will simply send out an email to like 35 interpreters and say, I've got something next week, Tuesday, it's about English. We need English, and that's all. And then somebody will get back to them, usually the first person or the first two people, if you're lucky, to get back to them, will get the job. And that's kind of it. If you're lucky, they're a good fit. If you're unlucky, they're not a good fit. And I think what we do is we handpick the interpreters, and I'm gonna use that. I know that you said that earlier, so I don't even want to take credit for that. But we handpick interpreters because we know the profile of the people that we work with. We know if they're going to be a good fit for the job, and I think we can also. I mean, we have the know-how and the skills and the time to really consult the client on what they need. So if they say, oh, we have a trade fair with 700 participants and our technology provider on site has a bidule, we're good to go, right? And then you'd be like, actually, maybe we can reconsider, and then you can kind of educate them as well. Whereas maybe some agencies do that. I think it depends on the project manager, but I think the ground level rule here is that they just kind of go for mass volume, and they just kind of try to get it out the door as quickly as possible. And so we can really take the client by the hand, and it depends on whether they want to understand what we need, but we can help them get to where they want to go, while at the same time ensuring that the interpreters have what they need to do the best possible job.
So how do you deal with it when you're the consultant and you're also working on the job? So obviously you have your own interpreting shifts to take care of. And then if something happens, you're the chef d'équipe, or the team leader for those who don't speak French. How do you deal with the balancing act of having your own interpreting to take care of and having all this role as team leader to take care of as well?
That's actually a really good question. So usually what I do, especially for these, so it usually happens for the very big teams of like 20 to 26 interpreters. Wait, 26? No, 24, 12 booths. Where we were all together. Right now, it's all obviously online. And in those instances, I rely on my boothmate a lot. They know, like we discussed it. It's not like I'm springing it up on the day. I'm just like, oh, by the way, you might have to like step in real quick. But if anything happens, I mean, I tell the team ahead of time, in case there's an emergency, you can always kind of wave at our booth window or send me a WhatsApp or whatever. I might not be able to immediately respond because I'm on my shift, but especially when it's actually a live event, I would usually tap on my boothmate and say, hey, can you take over for 2-3 minutes? I'm going to go outside, handle whatever it is, come back in, go back on the shift. Luckily, it doesn't really happen a lot because the biggest issues, quote unquote, or the biggest challenges usually happen at the very beginning of the event. And I always make sure that I don't start on the first shift on the first day, which again, is all discussed ahead of time. And then I can I usually just walk around the booths and I just give them a little diving symbol like A-OK, and everybody's like, yeah, everything works. And so that's good. But I also do the rounds before the event. I'll make sure everybody has their water. I'll make sure everybody has the documents. I'll make sure everybody got the latest documents on the USB stick. And I'll be like, do you have any questions? Is there anything you need? And I make sure that anything they might want that I can provide. they have, and that just makes for much smoother sailing. It's the same for RSI, for example. When we did the big event, this was for 7 languages, but we had 4 people per language. So there was a lot going on as well. I actually made sure that we had documentation for the tools that we will be working with. I did Word documents with screenshots, and I said, okay, for the initial setup, you have to click here, little red circle, and then you type in your username, little red circle, and then the next step is this. And I think it was like a 10-page document with nothing but screenshots where they need to click. And it took a while to put everything together, but the positive feedback I got for sending out such a document was overwhelming because everybody really appreciated it, because it just took the uncertainty away. And I think especially in RSI situations, more than ever, you have to make sure that your team is confident, and you just take all the uncertainty out as much as you can, because it will allow the people to focus on interpreting, which is already not ideal from a home office situation, but it is the in extremis situation. And I think that's what you need to do on the interpreter side. You need to make sure that everybody is as comfortable as possible in order to make sure that they can do the best job that they can do. And equally so on the client side, in the run-up, you have to make sure that they're comfortable in the organizational part, because you're taking over the whole interpreting aspect. They don't need to worry about any of that. They can focus on quote unquote more important things, which we all know there aren't any more important things than interpreting, but and then during the event, you need to make sure that, when everything is running smoothly, it's running smoothly. But even if there are any issues, you can be the point of contact, and you can be like, okay, thanks for letting me know. We'll handle it. We'll do this or that. For example, in RSI, if there's a microphone that gives you like static noise, they will text me, and I will immediately text the interpreters, and we'll handle it in like 30 seconds. Or I don't know, any other issue that I can think of.
Someone's doing a speech from their car or something, and they're beeping in the background.
We've actually had that. Luckily, not from the interpreter side, but
yeah, I had a consulting event at the end of last year, and my combination wasn't involved, which is really annoying when that happens. Well, it was involved, but I wasn't available for various reasons. And I was checking in with the interpreters quite frequently. And at one point, I got a message back from one of the interpreters saying, everything's fine. This is just weird.
And just I get that a lot.
Everything's fine. This is just weird. Okay, fine. And now I'm realizing how much consultant interpreters rely on really good audiovisual people. So for live events, there's only one company that I would ever deal with, because there's only one company that I trust, because I've had a bad experience with a company who turned up and it's like, yeah, I know you're not bringing all the equipment that you need. And then when it comes to RSI, you either have a really, really, really good platform provider, or you're in a studio somewhere. It's like there aren't really that many options. You just have to get it right, because you can't afford to mess up.
Absolutely. Yeah. So on live events, there's one company that is my preferred provider, and I usually work with them whenever I can. And I have a couple of their technicians, and their head technicians and division heads and whatever, and on speed dial, if you will. So that's really nice, because I know they always do a great job. You can completely rely on them. They're not going to mess it up. And they've actually, in the past, if I didn't think of something, they were like, hey, by the way, did you think of this? And I was like, oh yeah, thank you very much for bringing this to my attention. So it's not just like they kind of lean back and just we're like, oh, you've ordered this. We're just not going to do anything else. They actually are collaborators in the project, which is so appreciated. But on the flip side, there are also other companies. There was this one big event that I did in Berlin where we had 6,500 participants. So we needed 6,500 receivers and headsets and infrared repeaters and whatever. And then the company said, we can do it with the infrared senders and whatever, but it's going to be very, very expensive if we do it. We could also just apply for a radio broadcasting license with the German Office of Radio Broadcast Licensing, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be much cheaper. So they applied with the ministry of such and such, and it was much cheaper. It was much, much cheaper. And obviously that's nothing that I would have ever thought of, because I didn't know you could apply for a radio frequency license with the ministry. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how would one know this if you're not from that industry necessarily? So there are different providers for different things, and also different providers in different countries, obviously, which is also very helpful if you just have a list.
It's kind of knowing who you can trust. So now there's $1 million question that I get asked a lot, and I don't have a good answer, so I'm hoping you do. And that is, if you come across student interpreters or newer interpreters and they're saying, we really want to work with a consultant interpreter, how do we get in the Rolodex or on the list? What's your response when people say that to you, or if they've said that to you?
Pray? I don't know. No, I think what you I think what you should do is get yourself out there, make sure that they know who you are. An easy way, well, it's actually not an easy way, but a way of doing it is if you hire the consulting interpreter, because that way they get to know you and you kind of invite them and you're saying, hey, I don't know, I'm in the French team. I need a French booth made. Jonathan, can you come in and join me in the French booth? Because that way you will see how they work firsthand. You will kind of experience them, their mannerisms, how they interact with the clients. And usually if you've spent a day or two with someone in the booth, you get a good feeling for them. Maybe they have a bad day, maybe they have a great day, sure. But you still get a feeling for the person. And even if a really good interpreter has a very bad day, you can still tell they're usually a good interpreter. Maybe they had the flu or something. So I think that is a way of creating that personal connection, because then they will simply know you. And then it's just, I don't know. I think once you know someone, and I like to work with people who I like. Right. So be nice. I think that's always a really good tip. Be nice to the consultants, not in like a suck-upping kind of way. Is that even an expression? It's an expression now. But just be pleasant. Nobody wants to work with people they don't like, who are unpleasant, who are divas. Don't be a diva.
I think also I realized that the vast majority of emails that I get from people asking to work with me show a lack of understanding in what it is that people look for in an interpreter. So you get the typical one is, I interpret between these 6 languages and I can interpret any event.
Yes. Who are these people? I keep getting those and I immediately delete them, because I have never met a professional interpreter who's in any professional association who I've come across, even outside of an association, who would send such an email. And they're usually very long. It's a ton of text. They interpret between, like you said, 6 to 8 languages. They have all the different specialties in the world. And I'm like, do you really think this comes off professionally?
And I think
this is very strange.
I got a far more useful email from someone once, and it taught me a lesson. Rather than the person asking if I could give them work, they sent me an email saying, I'm a new student interpreter. I've studied under so-and-so, and they named their tutor, and I happen to know the tutor personally, as a lot of consultant interpreters will know people who train interpreters.
Yeah.
And rather than asking me for work, they said, how would you recommend that I went about getting work? And I thought that's a much better way of doing it, because you're not pressuring the person at the other end to give you work. You're saying, I don't know how this world works. I thought, asking a question, I don't know if you've had that experience of someone asking a question and you go, because you've asked me that question. I think I actually sent an email to their tutor and said, is this person any good? Because you can ask that quietly, or lift the phone or something. But have you ever had an email and you've thought, I want to know more about you because you've asked a really good question that I hadn't thought of before, I've not had a lot of people ask before?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did the same thing. I sent an email to not their tutor, but I sent an email to a colleague who I knew had worked with them. Just because it had come up, it was their specialty, was finance. And I was like, oh, she works a lot in finance. Maybe she's worked with them. They're from the same kind of market. And so she did. And she told me, yeah, great person. You can totally work with them. And I think that is a lot of the times how it works. And also, because you've just brought it up, I think the associations can really help you here with the mentoring programs, because a lot of the times the mentor So I don't know how it works. Let's say you have a great mentee and you and I are talking, and I'm like, oh, I'm organizing this big event, and I'm currently organizing the Spanish booth. And you're like, oh, you know what? My mentee has Spanish. What's the specialty? And I'll be like, oh, I don't know, it's medical. And you're like, oh, look, she has a degree in, I don't know, as a neurosurgeon. It's perfect.
Give up neurosurgery to become an interpreter because it's more complicated.
Absolutely, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's also a lot of the times how it works, because then you and I are talking, so the mentor and the consultant are talking kind of on an eye level, because they already know each other, and I know that if you recommend that person, you wouldn't really lead me astray. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I have recommended, there was one client who I gave them 2 names for free because I'm like, it's 2 interpreters, big deal. Was my combination. But in both cases, they were interpreters that I knew would do a fantastic job. So I personally find that it's rare to find really solid, brilliantly reliable finance interpreters. They're rare. And good medical conference interpreters, no matter how much they charge, they're worth it, because to find someone who can sit and there was one,
because they're all neuroscience surgeons.
It was also like some pharmaceutical event I was asked to do a quote for it. They ended up sending it to Italy instead. Maybe you got it. It was some giant pharmaceutical event that needed 10 languages and 20 interpreters, and it got it's stupidly expensive very quickly, because medical conference interpreters know how much they can charge.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Whenever the medical stuff comes up, it's like, well, that's not going to be cheap. Anyway, so I'm kind of looking at the time a little bit and realizing this is going to be a really interesting final video. I want you to imagine 2 scenarios first. I want you to imagine first that this video is coming in front of your dream client. And the kind of client who cares more about the end result of interpreting than the price. And we've all met them, and they're a pleasure to work with. If there's one sentence you would want your dream client to see at the end of this video, what would it be?
So I'm imagining they're looking.
They're watching this YouTube video. It's been edited down, as inside interpreting videos are always edited, and they've come to this last line of the video, and you want to send them home happy and send them home wanting to call you.
I will tell them that if they contact me for interpreting for their event, I will make sure they feel at ease every step of the way.
And the last one, I know for a fact that there are quite a few newer interpreters who watch Inside Interpreting and get inspired by it. And I know myself, when I was starting out in interpreting, the first couple of years were so frustrating because it was really hard to get people to trust me with anything. Is there any encouragement or advice that you would give the students that you would like, to help them know that they can make it and that it's worth them keeping on trying?
Just go ahead and do it. I mean, honestly, when I started out, 99.9% of the times I would say yes first and then figure out how to do it later. The client would ask me, oh, can you put together a team of 3 people for a medical conference? I'd be like, of course, no problem. And then I hang up the phone and I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to do that? But then you figure it out. So just because you've never done one thing doesn't mean that you can't do it. I think that's a really good phrase to live by. Because you have, especially coming out of university, you have a huge network of your fellow students. You can always hopefully approach your tutors or your lecturers, and you also know some other interpreters out there. You might not have a huge network, but you will know some people. And if they're nice professional interpreters who abide by the rules of the association, they will help you, because that is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to strengthen each other and uplift each other and strengthen the market. And so just because you haven't done something doesn't mean that you can't do it. So go out there and do your best, try it, and you will figure it out and you will succeed.
That is a fantastic end to the interview. Thank you very much.
Yay.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.